Welcome to my talk. Thank you for coming. We've got a full house here. My name is Michael Bailey. I'm a distinguished engineer at American Express, and today I'm talking to you about Android Studio tips and tricks. You can find me on social media at Yogurt Earl. I'm calling this part 3 because most of the content is new compared to what I've previously done. If you take a picture with Lens, you can click on the links to watch the previous versions of the talk. They're a little bit old, but most of the content is still relevant. I first gave the original version of this talk in 2014 before Android Studio had hit 1.0. So things have changed quite a bit. We're now in animals rather than version numbers of Android Studio. And there's a lot of new things to talk about. So today I'm going to be presenting using the Canary version of Android Studio. It's a little bit risky there, but hopefully everything will go all right. But just in case you're using Jellyfish, which is stable, or something newer, watching the recording, things may appear a little bit different than what you see here. So just be aware of the version that you're using versus this version. The project that I'm using today for these demonstrations is now in Android, which is a sample application from Google that demonstrates modern Android development practices. If you haven't seen this repo, definitely check it out. There's a lot of great things you can see in there with a modularized application that's using Compose and Compose navigation and a lot of the other Jetpack libraries. I'm going to be using a lot of keyboard shortcuts, although some things that I would normally do with keyboard shortcuts, I'm actually going to be doing through the UI because it's a visual presentation, which works a little bit better. But also one of the first tip is that you can actually turn on a feature in Android Studio that will show you the keyboard shortcuts as I type them so that you can't see what I'm typing, but you'll be able to see up there. So we'll go into Find Action, we'll do Presentation Assistant, bring up that, and you can turn on Show Action Names and Shortcuts in pop-up. There's a number of different options, how big you want it, where on the screen you want it, how long you want it to display for, and which keyboard shortcuts you want it to do. So we'll turn that on. And now you can see when I do a keyboard shortcut, it'll show that. This can even be useful if you're pairing with somebody and you're doing something and they're, hey, what was that shortcut you just did? If you turn this on, they might not have to ask that, especially if you're in a larger group and demonstrating something maybe to your coworkers. Another good thing to use, especially when you're on a video conference or showing something with your coworkers, is the IDE full zoom, because sometimes you want to make it bigger just for a little bit while you're presenting and you want to go back to your normal settings. So similar to in Chrome, how you can zoom in and zoom out, you can use Control-Alt+ to fully zoom everything in the IDE, and minus to make it smaller, and then 0 to go to 100% zoom. All right, the next one I'm going to talk about is the change signature refactoring. So in Compose, you may want to add a new, let's say, event handler. And I have a number of use cases across the code base of this. So you can see it's used in a number of different places across the code base. And I want to add a new parameter here. So I can pull up the refactor this dialog with Control-T. And you can see there's a change signature refactoring. There's also a shortcut, Command F6. So I'll use the shortcut, Command F6. And this pulls up a dialog that shows you all the parameters, the name, the type. And you can change any of these. For our example today, I'm going to add a new type. We'll call it on have fun. Just make it a lambda that returns unit. We'll give it a default value of an empty lambda, but we'll add a comment in there to show that this is the value we just added. And then I'll hit refactor. And what this did is it added it here, but it also went and found all the call sites, and it added it also to the call sites with that default argument. So by just adding this, now my code still compiles, my tests will still run, and I can go and add in the appropriate integrations where needed. But if I look here, I could see at all the various call sites, it's now added this where it didn't exist before as a new line. I'm going to undo that change and show a different way to do this. So sometimes you may not remember that this refactoring exists and you're just adding something in, changing the signature. So maybe I want to reorganize this and put this on topic click up a few lines. So I'll take that and I'll put it there. And then maybe I also want to add in that on have fun callback. So I've made a few changes here to the signature. But now if we go and look for the usages of this, we'll see that they now have red code because, if they were using ordered parameters, they would now be in a different order, but also added a new one that's not optional, and it hasn't been added here, so I'm getting a red error. So you might realize after you've done this and typed this in that, oh, I forgot to use change signature refactoring, but instead of having to go undo this and pop up that dialog and use that, you can notice that there's an icon up here that says R for refactoring, and it's noticed that you've changed the signature. So if you do Alt-Enter, you'll notice there's an update usages to reflect the signature change. So it's sort of detected what you did in your text, and it will apply that to all the call sites for you. So if I do that, it's going to notice that I moved this from here to there, and I added this new parameter, and that's good. So I can just say next. And I can, again, add an optional value if I want to fill in that parameter everywhere. So I will do that. Call it default, and say update. And now it's gone and looked at all the call sites. And we can see what it did here is it moved this one for me, moved it up in all the call sites, and it also added this new parameter. So even when you edit the text of a parameter, you can do this refactoring to have it go apply that to all of your call sites for you, and then you can go from there and do the integrations that you need with that new parameter or changed method signature. And I will undo all that for now. Okay. Still looking at this on-topic callback. If you've done compose, you know the unidirectional data flow idea of compose is that state flows down, events flow up. Well, with the events flowing up, sometimes it can be hard to trace in the code base, especially if you're new to a code base or unfamiliar with that part of the code base. Where is this callback getting wired up? So you can do I can look at, I can do Command B to see that this was passed in to this thing, but then where does this get called from? I can do a find usages to see, okay, this gets passed in 3 different places, once in a test and 2 in these other composables. And then you can sort of trace all the various places that this gets passed in there. But there's another way to do this analysis. If you put your cursor on topic click, do a context click or a 2-finger click, and you do analyze data flow to here. I'm going to look at it across the whole project. And now what this has done is it's gone and looked everywhere that this is used. And if I do expand all on the side here, it expands all the places this is passed through. So I can trace and see every step if I want to see along the way how it eventually got here. I can look there, and it gets passed as a parameter, which then gets called from here, which then was passed as a parameter here, which this then gets called there. But if you go all the way down to the end, I can see that this was passed in at the very top level as navigate to interests. I can see it's passed in both here, but you can also, if I scroll down, I can see the other route to this call up here and where that got passed through, and I can see the full route where this got passed through down through all the layers. And you can see all the different times it's passed in from tests. It's also passed in an adaptive layout for a list detail screen, we actually pass in a different callback there. So I can see where that gets passed and how that gets traced through. So this can help a lot with understanding and the flow of the code base, especially with events getting passed up all the way to the top level of your composables without having to do find usages and go to declaration over and over and over to trace all the paths that it goes through. Very useful in Compose. I'm going to shift and talk a little bit about some of the Git features that Android Studio supports. So Android Studio has a built-in terminal, so obviously you can just open the terminal and do Git commands on the command line. But there's some things that are just easier to do from a UI. But most things you can do in any other separate standalone Git UI, you can actually also do from Android Studio. So I'm just going to highlight a few here. I could probably do one or more talks just on the Git integration that's in Android Studio. But I'm going to call out a few that I've found particularly useful. I'm going to open up the Git window. Zoom out just a little here to let us see a little bit more. And I can see here's all of the branches that are available on this repo. I'm going to pick this branch, and then I'm going to find some commit that I'm interested in. Maybe I'm interested in this particular commit. I can see the diff of this commit. So in this particular commit, this was the changes that were made. They added some logging to this test. Now, one thing I can do is I can just go and try to take this diff and apply just this change specifically to my local version. Let's see what happens if I do that. Now, it tells me here this version doesn't exist. So the branch that I'm currently on, which is the main branch, actually doesn't have this file at all, so I can't apply a patch to a file that doesn't exist if I just wanted to apply that single change. And that's okay. The other thing I can do is if there's some other branch that my coworker is working on or that I previously worked on, and I just want this file or a set of files, and I want to take them from that branch without having to check it out and just bring them into my local working copy, I can just do git from revision. And what that is going to do is just copy that whole full file from this other branch into my local working copy. Now, you may have different results with this depending on how different that branch is. In this case, this test does a lot of things and has a lot of imports that aren't on my local branch, so it's not going to work out of the box. But occasionally, you just want to go grab code from a different branch without having to switch to that branch. And this just will pull that whole file into your local working directory. I'm going to undo that because it won't compile. All right. The next thing that we're going to look at is looking at the history of a particular file or particular set of code, subset of code in a file. So if I'm interested in how did this come about, who added this, when did it change, you can do, on the command line, you can do git log and try to figure out when this file changed. And I could do show history, and it shows all the changes. But this is a big file, and it's changed for a lot of reasons that aren't specific to this part of the code. So I don't really care about most of those changes. I'm interested in just what happened here and where this came about. So what you can do is you can go to Git and you can pick Show History for Selection. And what this does is it goes through all of those revisions and it looks for just the parts, the commits that changed that part of the code. So out of all those revisions, I think there was like 99 that touched this file, only 3 of them actually changed this part of the code. So I could see originally where it was introduced in this commit. I could see they removed a spacer modifier here in this commit. And here they did some renaming. So I can focus in on just the changes to just that part of the file and filter out all the other changes to the larger file. So now that I've done a little bit of investigation, maybe I want to ask a coworker about this code, or maybe I want to point them to some code that's only on my branch that I pushed, but I want to say, hey, look at this code for me. There's a couple things you can do there. One is you can select code or just have your cursor on a line, and you can do open in GitHub. So I'm going to go down here and say open in GitHub. And I've assigned a keyboard shortcut to this. I don't think by default it has a keyboard shortcut, but just like anything in IntelliJ, if you can find the action name, you can assign it a keyboard shortcut. And I've done that because I use this a lot. So I will trigger that keyboard shortcut, and that will pop up a browser that will, and this commit is already, this is on main, so this is already on the server. So if the commit is pushed, it will find that exact commit and highlight those exact lines in that exact commit on GitHub, so that you can then go and do whatever you need to do in the GitHub UI, or you can copy and paste the link into chat and have your coworkers, hey, look at this code, and you can talk about that code. And if you just need to grab the link and you don't need to open it in a browser, you can also do copy link to the GitHub repository, and it won't open it in a browser. It'll just copy that link so you can go drop it in chat. And I've assigned a keyboard shortcut to this because that's also a useful thing to be able to do. So I can see if I hit that keyboard shortcut, then I can paste that. Oops. Froze here. Let's try unconnect and reconnect. All right, there we go. So I'm going to copy the link, and then I'm just going to paste it here so you can see it. So you can see it just copied that to my clipboard, and I pasted a link, and I can drop that in chat to have somebody look at that code as long as it's pushed. Another useful thing to do is review PRs right in Studio. So if you open up the pull request tab on the side of Studio, you'll see that it'll pull up all the pull requests, and you can filter just like you can in the GitHub UI, but it'll show all the pull requests that are, these ones I think are open. We can filter by open. See the open pull requests on this repo. We can look at a particular one. I'll look at this 1488 one. And you can open multiple pull requests in tabs here so that if you need to go between multiple ones. I can see all the changes that they've made. If people have commented on this PR, I'll be able to see what PR they have. And they have this integration for multiple different Git repository hosts. So depending on what you use, the integration works mostly the same. I can see all the commits that are on this branch. I can look through those commits. I can check out that branch for that PR. So I'm actually going to do that. So let's check out that branch. All right, so it checked out that branch locally for me. And then you can do either right in the diff. You can see the diff of what's happened. I can see somebody else. Oh, I had already made a comment here. I'm going to delete that. And I'll add it again. But you can comment right in the diff by hitting plus or selecting multiple lines. If you select multiple lines and you hit plus, that will make a multi-line comment. And so now this comment will be targeted at those specific lines. You can also, if you hit Command down, that opens the file in your local working copy. And because I've checked out the branch for this PR in my local working copy, you can now see on the side here this pink bar. And you're maybe used to the green bar or the blue bar showing what's new or what's changed relative to Git. This pink bar means that this is already committed, but it has changed relative to the destination branch of the PR. So this change is not a change that's in my local working copy. It's actually a change that's on that PR, but that means I can comment on it. Even if I'm not in the diff, if I'm just reviewing the code and working around in there, I can see, this was changed on this PR, and I can leave a comment on that even if I'm not looking at the diff. And I'm not sure that this is in Jellyfish. This might only be in Koala and later. And another thing you can do is you may be familiar in the web UI for GitHub and other similar tools, you can propose a specific change. So I want to change this lines to this line. They don't support that in the UI, but you can still do that effectively here by doing a code-fenced block with the word suggestion. So if I do suggestion in a code-fenced block, and all right. Looks like it froze again. There we go. And I copy and paste that, and I suggest that we change that to a different version. Of course, this wouldn't work, but and I'm just starting a review, so it won't actually show up on the PR. But you can see now that because I did it in that code-fenced block with suggestion, it actually shows the diff, and so the author of the PR can actually take this and apply it to their branch directly in the PR. So if I want to suggest a change, I can make it easier for them to take that change by just suggesting it right there, and they can hit apply, and it'll commit that to their branch. And I am going to recheck out the, I froze again. All right, so that's the end of the Git things that I was going to show you. The next one I'm going to show you is a tool called Modularize. And let's say you have a large module that you would like to break into smaller modules at the Gradle level. This tool will help you do some analysis to figure out if I want to move this thing from one module to the next, what other things is it going to have to bring along with it as it goes. I'm going to try to see what happens if I want to modularize the main activity, which is in the app module. So I can open the refactor this dialog, and I can search for modularize. And it looked through the code base, and it decided that it sees 11 classes and 19 other declarations and some resources that it would need to move to be able to move this. And I'm just going to hit the preview here. All right, so when I hit modularize, it did some analysis, and it says that there's 11 classes that have to move, some other declarations, some resources. So if I hit preview, and then I expand all of this, I can see sort of the transitive list of everything it thinks that needs to move if I was going to move this. And this is because activity references those things. So if I move the activity, I need to move all this other stuff, otherwise it's not going to compile. And all the way down to resources that it needs to move and things like that. Now, there is actually a refactor button. We'll attempt to do all of this for you. I will say that there's a number of issues where it doesn't quite work as expected, but just that analysis part that tells you what needs to move can help you identify strange dependencies where you're wondering, why would I have to move this class in order to move this class, and give you the path to trace from one to the other and understand why those two classes are linked. So just for that, it's still useful. I'll say there's a number of known issues with how modularize doesn't quite do the right thing in various scenarios. And actually, if you read these issues, it'll help, like, you can work around some of those issues in modularize and get it to work a little bit better for you. But if you also want to take a picture and click on all these and star them, that'll help get more priority for fixing some of these issues. Because it's such a great feature, but it's just not quite there yet. I'll give you a chance to take a picture if you want. All right, debugging Gradle logic. Oh, man. Frozen again. So there's a Gradle tool window in Android Studio. And if you come up here in the Gradle tool window, you can execute any Gradle command as you would on the command line. For this example, because I just want something quick, I'm going to execute Gradle help, which just runs configuration. So I'm going to execute that, and you can see that executed pretty quickly. But just by doing that, what I've done is I've created a run configuration, similar to how you run your application or you run your tests. So if I pull up the dialog for run configurations, I can see I have now an Android help, which is just run the help task on this project, in addition to the other normal run configurations that get set up for you. But because I have a run configuration, I can also just debug that configuration. And if I would, let's say I wanted to understand a bit better what's going on in my settings.gradle, I can set breakpoints in my settings.gradle, and I can bring up that run dialog, and I can say debug the help task, which is going to run this logic. It has to run the settings.gradle logic. It's going to rerun that again and attach a debugger to it. So now you can see I'm paused at a debugger in my gradle.kts file. I've got all the normal debugger type things, and I can step through. I can do evaluate expression and do watches and other things. And this might help you understand, see the stack trace. So why is this logic getting called? At what point is it getting called? How many times is it getting called? All the things that you can do with the debugger can really help you understand some Gradle issues if you're struggling. So definitely use the debug, the ability to debug your Gradle, because it's Kotlin code, and you should be able to debug it. And Studio makes that pretty easy. So if I just hit run, we'll see it triggers on this other breakpoint that I had down there, and so on. You can keep going. One thing I will tell you that when you're done doing that, make sure you hit stop, because otherwise your Gradle daemon is stopped at a breakpoint. And then when you try to run other Gradle things and nothing works and it just pauses, it might be because you still have a debugger attached to your Gradle daemon. So make sure you hit stop when you're done debugging Gradle. So as we're doing compose code, we've all used modifiers in various ways, but we've also probably all had the experience of maybe importing the wrong version of modifier. You can see here, it suggests that I import Java lang reflect modifier, which in most cases is probably not the one I want. And if I'm not paying attention and I just hit, yeah, import the thing, and it imports it, and then I wonder why things aren't working, and I have to go realize that I added the wrong import statement, or if I copy and paste code and it picks an import statement for me, that can be quite a frustration. So one thing you can do is if you open settings and you search for auto import in settings, and you scroll down here, you can see there's a list of things that you can exclude from auto import. It doesn't mean you can't import it, it just won't automatically do that for you, and it won't suggest these as imports for you. So there's actually a number of different modifiers in various classes that come in that I've already told it not to import here. But I can add an additional one, java.lang.reflect. Add that. Okay, and now you can see it didn't even suggest anything. It just auto-imported it because I have import things on the fly. And so it just picked the correct one, and we can in fact see it pick the compose version of modifier without me needing to tell it, which is also very convenient. I don't have to tell it what to import because there's only one modifier in scope to import, and I've excluded all the other versions of modifier. All right, I'm going to run a test here. This is just a /test unit test, not an Android test. And if I run this test, two things that I find useful but not necessarily immediately obvious are, I ran this test. I can open the HTML Gradle report that Gradle generates right from this result here if there's something in that report that I need to see. or maybe you're just used to looking at those, I can click that and it will open in the browser the result that was output from Gradle as I ran that. Now, beware that this actually, if it got a configuration cache hit when it was running the test, that link won't show up. So if you're ever wondering why it's grayed out, there's a couple different reasons why it might be grayed out. So what you can actually do is if you modify the run configuration for running the test and you add -no configuration cache at the end here, that will make that link work. It will also slow things down because your configuration cache is not working. But you will get that Gradle test result HTML if that's important to you. The other thing you can see is this dropdown gives you test history. So if you're iterating on a test and it's failing or it's passing and you want to go back to a previous result of like why was it failing and what was the error message when it was failing, rather than going back to that previous test and rerunning it with the failing test, you can actually go and see the previous versions of when you have run this test and see what the results were. So it was passing there. Oh, it failed here. And I could see what the error message was, and that might help me as I'm reworking that test or figuring out what to do about that test without having to go back, revert my changes, rerun the code to understand what was going wrong. All right, let's take a look at a composed preview. Oh. All right, so we've got this preview. And as you may know, you can deploy previews to devices. So if I hit this over here, it's going to take that preview, compile it, and deploy it to an emulator or a device. You can also run the preview, of course, in Android Studio as an interactive preview where it executes the preview without an Android device. Sometimes those do surprising things and they don't work 100% as you might expect because it's not actually running in an Android environment, it's running actually in the process of the IDE. But you can see it worked here. Now there's no mutable state hooked up to any of this, so it's not really affecting anything, but I can see the ripple effect happening. But when you deploy it to a device, you can actually attach a debugger and step through and figure out why your preview's not working right. Here, you can't attach a debugger when it's running within the IDE process, and sometimes you run into weird issues where, because it's not actually in an Android environment, it doesn't act quite the same as you might expect. So one thing you can do is you can actually add print statements in here. So I add print line on toggle. You can notice it's live updating as I do this, and as it's running this in the interactive preview, and I'm going to tap this, which calls that callback, it's going to do this print line. But your question might be, well, where does that print line end up? Well, if you go to help and you do show log in Finder, there's a file called idea.log, which has the general IDEA Android Studio logs from your IDE, and because this is running in the IDE process, it goes to that same place. So you can see those print statements there, although there's sometimes a lot of noise. Let's see. Okay, so I hit that a bunch of times, and you can see it's showing up there. I've got this filtered for standard out, so that filters a lot of the other IDE logs that might be noisy. So I filter standard out here, and that anything that I do a print line from anywhere inside the preview, as it's running in interactive mode, it will print those out to the logs. So it's not quite as good maybe as a debugger attached to it, but it can definitely help figure out some weird issues as to why this thing is working or not in the IDE mode, the interactive preview. Network inspector. All right, we're going to start up an emulator here. And one thing to note about the emulator, you can have embedded emulator in Android Studio using the running devices, which will show you your physical device if it's connected, or your emulators in multiple tabs here. I don't have anything running right now, but if I open my terminal and I run this emulator. I'm just running a command line emulator, and maybe you need to customize the emulator, pass a certain flag or something, so you actually want to run it from the command line, or you want to see the logs of the emulator because you're trying to debug something. But I actually want to use the embedded running in Android Studio version. If you pass this flag of -qt hide window, you can run that emulator. It'll run in your terminal, but the UI, it won't pop a separate window. The emulator will show up inside of Android Studio. So I'm going to actually run that there. And then if I hit Control-C in the command line here, it'll kill that emulator, so you have a little bit better control of when the emulator starts and stops as well. You can see it's starting up an emulator here. And then I'm going to deploy the app to this emulator. Oops, that's the wrong one. Deploy the app. And then if you go into app inspection, that has a number of different things, including a network inspection. So if you don't use this tool or you've forgotten about it, I definitely recommend using Database Inspector if you have local SQL-like databases, Network Inspector, or Background Test Inspector. It's sort of like the inspect window in Chrome where it shows you all the network activity. And what it actually does is, regardless of the networking library, it injects code into your application to hook into all the networking calls and show them here. So if I add a few things here, you can see just scrolling around in this application is triggering some network things that we can look into. If you're new to an application, you want to know what the network traffic looks like, that's useful. If you're integrating an SDK and want to see what type of network traffic it's sending, usually it'll show that as well. So if I look here, for example, it looks like some of these icons are being loaded as SVGs over the network. So for example, this response, I can see the request here was for this SVG. The type was SVG XML. I can see the size of it, what thread it ran on, what the URL was. And then based on the content type that the response says, it will actually try to parse that for you. So I can look at the raw response, which is text, but it'll also view and try to parse it and give you syntax highlighting, assuming that your content type is actually correct. So it can outline that. You can see what the request looked like, the body of the request. There's nothing there. And if it's an image, it'll just show you that image right away. Let's see if we... you can also see this stack trace. So here's one that it's actually claiming is application JSON, but you can see that's clearly not JSON, so it's trying to parse it as JSON. So something's going wrong there, so it can help you debug those types of issues. But I also might be wondering, like, what in the app is sending this application? Something with Firebase logging on this thread pool, and you can actually look at the call stack to try to figure out where that request is coming from, where in the code. Some Google Android data transport is sending this request that claims it's JSON, but the response is clearly not actually JSON. So that might be something, if you have something similar, that you can use that as a jumping off point to investigate what's going on in your application. Clipboard history. So some operating systems like Windows actually have clipboard history built in, but I find this invaluable. And Studio builds in a clipboard history, so you can see some of the things I've copied to my clipboard here. If you do Shift-Command-V, it will bring up the history of things, and I can pick one and I can paste that into the file I'm at. You can also find various open source operating system level clipboard history solutions. This one only sees what you copy from Android Studio and only works in Android Studio, so it's a little bit limited in scope, but it comes out of the box. If you find that useful, you might want to look into options for operating system-wide clipboard history. But that's something I find invaluable, is having the clipboard history, because I will often copy multiple things, and then I want to go to the like third thing I copied 3 times ago and paste that somewhere, especially if I'm going back and forth between code and chat and things like that. And that's all the time I have for today. So I'm going to go to the end here. I'm going to say thank you, and we are hiring, so please check out our job site. We have a number of great jobs at great locations. I've been here at this company for 15 plus years, so it's a great place to work. You can find me on LinkedIn and reach out, or find me in the hallway if you have any questions. But thank you.